Welcome, everyone. This meeting is now called to order, and the roll call has been taken by the clerk. A reminder of the rules of procedure. This meeting is being held in a hybrid format in accordance with the electronic participation policy for virtual meetings. The full corporate policy 50 regarding electronic and virtual meetings is available online to review. Staff and delegates participating are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the chair or members of the committee. All cameras for virtual committee members shall remain on to ensure quorum. Members of the committee shall indicate they wish to speak by physically raising their hand. Members who are present in person will be given the first speaking opportunity, followed by virtual participants. All members of the committee will vote by a physical show of hands. Please leave your hand raised until the chair has determined the result of the vote. In the event of a connection or service interruption that occurs that affects quorum, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. All rules for delegations under the city's procedural bylaw will continue to apply. So moving on to item number 2, any declarations of conflicts of interest with anything on the agenda?
I have a conflict with 4.2. Sit on the board of directors, King Industrial Heritage Center, owns a lease on the property.
Okay, thank you for declaring that conflict. Any other member have any conflicts with anything on the agenda? Seeing none. We'll move forward to item 4, items for consideration. Proposed alteration to 70 Market Street, application HA 10-23. I'd ask Alan Scott, who is available by phone, to come forward and speak to this item. A reminder that you have 10 minutes inclusive of questions.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Oh, awesome. That works. Thank you so much. And thank you for your time. Just very briefly to explain what this project is about. So TD Bank is experiencing some security issues in their ATM lobby in terms of people staying overnight in the lobby and creating a bit of security concerns for customers. And so the proposal is to turn one of our ATM machines facing outside. To do this, we have to rebuild a room in front of part of the windows of the front, and then clad the front with some new finished metal cladding that goes sort of around our new ATM machine. And then there's a very slight canopy that goes overhead to protect a little bit our customers from rain, and then provide a little bit more security with some downlighting. So we're trying to do this as subtle as we can on the front. We're keeping our green coloring where our banking machine is, and keeping with sort of the black adjacent to it with metal panels, so that we're trying to sort of speak to the language of the blackness of that sort of part of the facade. We are in how we're going to do this. We're proposing that we will keep the window frames behind the new cladding that we'll put. So we're not tearing things down. We're sort of covering the face of them so that we have a clean and smooth front facing into the street area. It really is all about security for us and presenting, a clean brand for our bank, but also a clean facade for the front of it. I know there's a number of things in the report that it was looking at in terms of this isn't the section we're interacting with in terms of our new proposal isn't the main entry into the building. It's not sort of a center entry building. So we're adjacent to that main sort of entry lobby. It does mean we take out a small door that's existing from the outside into sort of what was our banking machine lobby area. And then, but again, it's more of a side door. It's not a main feature door. I think that's pretty much it, sort of in terms of the proposal. Open to any questions you have with what we're planning to do.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from members of the committee for Alan? Linda, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I was wondering, how many ATMs does the TD Bank currently have?
At this location?
Yes.
There's a total of 3 right now. Both of them are in an inside area, sort of behind this glass area. And then we have one sort of small freestanding one that was in the main building lobby that really isn't used that much. So we'll have the one facing outside. So we'll have 24-hour access from the outside, and then there'll be one more on the inside. So a total of 2.
So will the TD be looking to put both ATMs outside eventually?
No, we're really the one machine will cover sort of what usage we have after banking hours, and allows us to get 24 hours access. And then we'll keep one inside, so that for people who want to come inside to the branch and when the branch is open, certainly. So there's an interior ATM as well.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Alan? Beth, go ahead.
Are you considering any additional lighting in this area of the ATM?
Well, the ATM has a little bit of downlight already, and then the little sort of canopy piece that we'll put it just goes along underneath our front sign, and just over this new ATM area that we're facing outside. So it will have some downlight shining onto that area to provide just a little bit more. From us, it's always about sort of being seen when you're at the ATM, and that you feel secure and safe there. So there will be a bit of downlighting, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions? See none? Thanks, Alan. We also have Zainib Dinesh here to also speak to this item. So same rules apply. You have 10 minutes inclusive of questions.
Hello?
Yep. Hi, Zainib.
Sorry. For adding me as a speaker to this, but I think Alan kind of covered everything. I was just nominating see if there are questions that people might have that would require us to respond. We're the architect of record on this project. So if there's any technical questions you have regarding how we're basically going about the scope of work, then I can answer. Otherwise, I think Alan has covered everything.
Any further questions for our other presenter? Dan Brown, go ahead.
So just to be clear, it's all going through the window or the door at the front? None of the actual structure is going to be touched or modified on the front?
So the only structure that we are adding is inside the room. We are adding posts and supports for the canopy, because we have a small canopy which kind of protrudes 2'2" out of the building. So we do have additional posts and columns inside, but nothing that modifies the existing basically structure. It's just an addition. And we're keeping the window frame. So all our stud work is basically built within the window frame. We just need to kind of build a new wall where the door was previously, because we want a secure area. So we're blocking that door and building a wall, but matching the same detail as existing right next to it.
Okay, thank you.
That answers your questions. Yeah. Any other committee members have any questions? See none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll now move forward to Patrick and his report.
Thank you, Chair. I will just wait for the presentation to go on the screen, and then I'll start. Thank you, Lisa. And so this is just the staff overview for Parish Road application HA 1023. Next slide, please. So I'm sure everyone is familiar with the TD Bank, but just for context, it's located in the Victoria Park Square Heritage Conservation District, and it's located at the northwest corner of Market and Darling. Next slide, please. Just have an aerial photo from the report just for context. Next slide. Then just to scope down the part of the building that we're discussing, we're looking at the Market Street facade. We're really looking at two of three windows within one specific bay of the building. The alterations don't extend beyond the yellow outlet area. Next slide, please. So as Alan and Zainab discussed, this is about introducing an external ATM. So there will be some interior works just to relocate the lobby. I don't know if any members of the committee are familiar with TD Bank. So what's being replaced is an entrance door into the ATM lobby. And then from there, you would basically walk into where the tellers are in the main bank front room. And then the doors just to the right of the screen is another alternate entrance at this time. So the proposal here would see some changes just to the ATM lobby to reorient the floor and where the ATMs are and introduce that external ATM. It's the secure room for the machines. So as the applicant showed, they'll be installing that external ATM in one of the window openings and then cladding the remainder where they remove the window and the existing door just in black metal cladding to further blend into the facade. This is a street view they've annotated. It's from, I think, 2018, 2017 perhaps, but there's no change to the sign band. So the current TD corporate green sign band is remaining unchanged. From the perspective of heritage alterations and guidelines, looking at the Parks Canada standards and guidelines, 3 of them sort of apply to this situation. We have standard 3, which is conserve heritage value with an approach calling for minimal intervention. Standard 11, conserve the value and character defining elements when you create new additions or new construction, make the newer physically and visually compatible and subordinate to the historic place. And standard 12, which is create new additions related to new construction so that the essential form and integrity of the historic place will not be impaired if the new work is removed in the future. There's also a number of guidelines in the city's district study. So the renovation projects should, whenever possible, utilize the original design components. New materials should be used in manners consistent with the original design. The visual focus of the main facade is typically the front entrance. This is a unique situation because the door that is being removed is actually fairly nondescript. It really does blend in with the glazing on the curtain wall. And when making changes, comply with the general shape and size of openings, and repetition of elements should be maintained. So in this case, it is an alteration to the facade, but in the context of this specific building within the district, it was a purpose-built bank building. It used to be the Canada Trust Bank, and TD was across Darling Street. Then when they merged, TD moved into this building. So this is a functional alteration that's directly related to the use. There's an allowance for some corporate colors, the TD green. The awning will blend in with the existing sign band. The green will really only apply to the ATM itself. And then the remainder of the work will be clad in black to more replicate the facade design of the building, which is sort of a black base and the white upper floors. There's no changes to the granite clad columns on either side. They're working strictly within those attributes. And then the main entrance, which is to the right, is being maintained and will become the main entrance on Market Street. There's an entrance around the back of the parking lot. So by and large, in my review, in my opinion, while they are altering the front facade, this is a very sympathetic change. It's sympathetic to the style of architecture, that 50s modernism, and it's direct updating of the existing use. So based on that, next slide, please. Staff are supportive of the permit, and so we recommend that the report be received and that the heritage permit be approved. So that concludes my staff overview of the application. I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee as well.
Any questions for Patrick? Dan Brown, go ahead.
Maybe just more of a comment that we're replacing glass with a steel clad on the front, on the right of the unit. Would that promote more like spray paint, graffiti?
I don't know if the material would be what encourages more graffiti. There are ways to clean glass and there are good ways to clean the metal. It is designed for outdoor use and it's very robust. I'm sure there have been other cases where it's used on the ground floor. I don't think this would have an impact. Personally, I have yet to see any graffiti elsewhere on the building.
It just seems like there's a new space now for somebody to do that compared to a glass where it could be easily scraped off.
Don't give them ideas.
Well, I'm not gonna promote the idea.
Okay, any other questions for Patrick? Seeing none, thanks, Patrick. So we have a motion ahead of us. Would anyone like to move, or I'll move first and then I'll seek a seconder. See Councillor Sullivan with his hand up. To move, seeking a seconder. Dan Brown, thank you. Any discussion from any of the committee members on this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Thank you. I declare that carried. We'll move right along to item 4.2, which will bring flashbacks from our last meeting. But we have two people here from Gravity Engineering to speak to this in further detail. So we're just waiting for them to come into the meeting.
If you see a prompt on your screen, please accept the prompt.
Accepted.
There's Gord. Great.
Nick from Gravity is also here with me, so we'll probably just share this.
Okay, so as a reminder, you have 10 minutes, inclusive of questions, so go ahead.
So I guess I'll just give a general outline of the work that is going to be done. There's two buildings on the site at 66 Mohawk Street. There's a portico building and timekeeper's office. We're basically going to be going in and restoring those buildings to a point to make sure that they remain in structurally stable condition for the years to come, and prior to I guess the CIHC is interested in developing that site, and at a time where they are able to complete their work, we will have the work done ahead of time to allow it to be in structurally stable condition, and allow them to work on that and do some aesthetical repair or aesthetical updates as they see fit to meet the needs of their project. So in essence, we're going to be doing facade work, roof work, and basically providing protection to the building elements to make sure that while it is waiting for this development, that it basically remains in good condition and doesn't deteriorate from the based on the elements that it'll be exposed to. So that's it from our side.
Okay, I'll ask committee members if there are any questions for the delegation. Seeing none, thank you. Thank you for your time. We now have Tara Tran coming forward with her staff report. Or overview of your report.
Yeah, I don't have a presentation. I was just going to use the staff report materials, just to reiterate that this is a continuation of what we presented to the committee last month, although this time it's actually the heritage permit itself. And the only change from last time was providing additional details about what the portico, what would be proposed for the rear of the portico to maintain its structural stability in the meantime, before, again, as Gord mentioned, the Canadian Industrial Heritage Centre is in a better and more ready position to pursue a more robust restoration project. So if you had any specific questions about how that rear would be treated, you can see the images in figures 4 and 5, I believe, or 3 and 4. Yeah, starting in 3, 4, and 5. But otherwise, the other details remain the same as what we presented in October, and now it's just formalized as a heritage alteration permit. That is it.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on this property? I know many of us have a affinity for this property. Go ahead.
There was also mention about a new fence. Can you elaborate on that?
Actually, I'll allow Tracy, if you don't mind, to just speak to. Tracy is from our project management side of things.
Yeah, so I think our number one priority is the restoration of the actual structures, just to make sure that they're not going to degrade any further. So I think when we go forward with the restoration, that's going to be the main focus, and of the dollars as well. And then fencing could be thought of maybe after the fact. The site is currently fenced with, I think it's a 6-foot high chain link fence. So to double up the fence, I'm not sure that would make it more secure. You could get in through the one and pass through the other. And also putting in the fence before we do the restoration is going to kind of make it harder to get machinery and equipment in to complete the restoration. So when that is complete, I think it's a good time to kind of take another look at that so that we can decide if we want, something that's going to block views or, make the views a little bit easier into the site so we can move forward with fundraising and all of the restoration that's going to go on at the site.
Okay.
Answers your question. Anything else? No? Any other questions from members of the committee? Great, seeing none. So we have a recommendation that this report be received and that the heritage permit be approved. Would anyone be interested in making that motion? Please, seconded by, I see a lot of hands. We'll go with Greg this time. Any other discussion on the motion then as presented? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. I declare that carried. We'll now move on to item 4.3, our Heritage Grant Program.
I can call him back. Sorry.
Yep. So we'll get Patrick. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks again, Lisa. So this is just an overview of the staff report for updates to the Heritage Grant Program. Next slide, please. So then just a quick refresher, the background for this report. So the Heritage Grant Program was initially adopted by bylaw in 2018. Unfortunately, as with many things, the COVID-19 pandemic sort of negatively impacted how successful that pilot project was. So we reported back to council in 2021, identified some minor procedure changes, as well as received approval for delegated authority. That was a larger change to the program, but one that certainly helped it assist and take in new applications. With that, we had direction report back by 2025 for a conclusion to the extended pilot period. Unfortunately, with the amendments in Bill 23 that affected the Ontario Heritage Act and our Heritage Register project, we took an alternatives report to council. Brantford Heritage Committee commented on that in Q1 of this year. And one of the recommendations within that report was to look at improving the Heritage Grant Program. Again, we had 3 key topics, which is increasing grants amounts to provide higher levels of assistance, improving the application process where we could, and then looking for ways to encourage heritage designation of properties on the register and adaptive reuse of designated properties through development and through that process, so we don't lose them through new development applications. So next slide, please. So just for, again, background, the current process is that staff will do a site consultation with the property owner. And from that, we determine what the scope of work is, what the eligible costs might be, and we give a letter to the applicant so that they know how to apply to the program and what they need to provide to us. From that, applicants can apply for a grant of up to $5,000. It's a matching grant, so that's based on the total eligible costs. 50% of those form the value of the grant. It's from a capital budget that's approved by council, and 2 quotes for the same scope of work are required. So in that process, do a staff review, we consult the Brantford Heritage Committee with respect to approval or denial, and then the approval authority is delegated to the chief planner. So we present the results of staff's recommendation and review, as well as the Heritage Committee's resolution. If approved by the chief planner, there's an agreement drafted and signed. The applicant is free to go start the work. And then when the work is done, we review it as staff. We go do a site visit, check the scope of work in the quotes that were provided and the paid invoices. And then when that matches up, we issue the grant to the applicant. And all applicants have to submit the same item, which is the form, the record of the consultation, a written description of the work, photos of the property, and the minimum of 2 quotes. Next slide, please. The key challenge we saw with the program really was in getting the applications in stage. Oftentimes applicants would get 1 quote, they would reach out to multiple contractors for the same scope of work, and then just due to the number of contractors who are working at any one time, some are on sites, they're working, they're getting other work done, they don't have time to do quotes. So they get 1 quote, then they spend time trying to get a 2nd quote, and they struggle at that point. The first contractor starts booking other jobs, and then they get nervous about if they're even able to apply to the program. So considering the first 2 items that we were directed to look at was that improve the level of financial assistance and introduce process improvements. What staff are looking to recommend to council and what the Heritage Committee has an opportunity to comment on is a new structure of 2 streams for grant programs. Minor applications would have a maximum grant requested of $7,500 or less. So that's worth up to $15,000. And then only 1 quote would be required. That would go to staff for a review. And if it met the terms of the bylaw, it was conservation work, it was preserving the historic components of the building, replicating and reintroducing features that may have been lost, but that we have documentation for. And that comes in under that $7,500 grant amount. With the staff review, we could take that right to the chief planner. So that both increases the amount of financial assistance, and it does introduce a process improvement. Now they only need 1 quote, and the application can come in at any time. We can review it as staff, and we can bring it to the chief planner for approval, which reduces the amount of time that the homeowner might be waiting or the property owner is waiting. The other stream would be major applications. So these would be where the grant requested comes in over $7,500 up to a maximum of $15,000. This is an amount, we all recall the porch removal that happened in September, that application HD 0123. That amount of eligible cost was $30,000, is approximately what they were looking at for their porch to be fully rebuilt to match the original. It's also what we see in our grant that's currently in the process of being refined and will be brought back to council, a downtown set head grant for facade improvements. So there is a baseline, other examples in the city of grants up to that value. We'd recommend, however, the process stays the same for the higher dollar value grants for the time being. So that would still require 2 quotes. It's a larger scope of work. It might include multiple components, whether it be wood repair and masonry repairs or specialty trades. So we'd still like to see 2 quotes for the time being. And that would still be reviewed by staff and Heritage Committee, similar to the current process. So you'd see a report from staff reviewing the proposed scope of work, reviewing standards and guidelines, and then presenting that to the committee for concurrence. In either case, we are still recommending that Applications can be approved or denied by the chief planner, and then the same process will follow, that the agreement would be signed. Once work is completed as was contemplated, we'll review, and then if it matches, we issue the grant to the applicant and their files closed. So we're not changing the types of projects that can apply either. It's always going to be repair, restoration, maintenance, preservation work. One will not fund a different type of work than the other. It's purely going to be about the scale. The issue of a $5,000 maximum is if you look at a commercial building downtown or a church, you have seen examples of grants that come in even higher. We'd like to keep watching the program uptake the next 2 years, and then in maybe 2025, when we do that final review, identify the types of applications we've been seeing and possibly recommend a different approach as well, or another increase to the maximum grant amount, subject to appropriate conditions. I think earlier this year there was St. Joseph's Church on Brant Avenue. Their work came in almost close to $100,000 possibly. That was while I was on parental leave. And then there was a prior application for a commercial property at 76 Colburn, foundation repairs. They got a grant, but again, that was well above the $10,000 of work costs. So those are the proposed changes to the grant as it currently stands. We're not proposing a budget request at this time. We still have just over $40,000 available in the budget from the original pilot. We'd like to keep monitoring that for the time being, and then return in a future budget cycle to request the top up based on the program uptake and the new maximum grant amounts that should last at least 1 year, maybe even 2 till the end of 2025. So that's for the capital grant that assists homeowners. The third component was looking at adaptive reuse. So next slide, please. When we did the original grant program for maintenance costs, it was a fairly standard approach across the province of matching grants. When it comes to encouraging redevelopment and larger scale projects, there's not that same consistency across other municipalities. So some would use community improvement plans like we have in Brantford. Others would use capital grants with a much higher amount, or maybe would go with loans. Considering the current regime we have, that's tax increment grants. We think that would be the best way to approach a grant program for adaptive reuse. It would also make it a simpler process. There'd be one application. It could consider heritage components. It could consider creation of residential units, but it wouldn't require multiple approvals for grants. It would be funded from one source, which is the increased property taxes. So the way a tax increment grant works, and each program has the same structure. There's 3 tiers. When a property comes in for development, there's a pre-development tax rate and how many dollar value for what we collect as a municipality. When they redevelop, the taxes go up to recognize the new use. Oftentimes it is an increased dwelling units, going from a 2-story commercial building to, let's say, an 8-story mixed use building will increase the taxes. So the city already has 2 programs, one for downtown and one for underutilized commercial properties elsewhere in the city, where we look at that increase in property taxes. The city keeps the original taxes coming in, and we refund 80% of the increased taxes only. So we keep the original taxes plus 20%. If there's no affordable housing, there's a refund period. That's the black bars, which show number of years along the bottom. Tax percentage refunded is your y-axis, or the vertical axis. If there's affordable housing, we step up the amount of refund. There's 10% of units are 80% of average market rent or less, then they're eligible for a 90% refund for the first 5 years. If they increase the affordable housing to another tier, they get 10 years of 100% of increased taxes refunded. So that's the regime now if you're redeveloping. There's encouraging the creation of residential units. That's ideally the best way to go about looking to adaptively reuse heritage properties into these new developments. So that's the avenue we'd like to explore, but there are questions about that in terms of we need time to understand council's position on those tax refunds, or with heritage committee, what's a threshold that is adaptive reuse versus too much loss of heritage features? What's a comfortable level of tax refund without going either too long or refunding too much money, and maybe even unintentionally disincentivizing the affordable housing components. So we'll take additional work, but we think The community improvement plan tax incentives are the ideal way, just because it does handle the goal of supporting adaptive reuse, but it also comes without the same kind of financial impact to the municipality. These are often taxes we wouldn't even collect if it weren't for this program incentivizing development. A case of a gray field, for example, would be the Canadian Tire site on Colburn Street, sat vacant for approximately 10 years and is now redeveloping. That's what the gray field program looks to do. So looking at that kind of incentive, but specifically extended to heritage and active reuse as well. There are a number of features which we'll be working on, but we're hoping to go to council and recommend that this approach be endorsed. It's not creating a program just yet or amending the plans. It's getting the direction from council to keep looking and to come back with work with Heritage Committee and come back with some options for implementing those incentives. So next slide, please. So these are there's also some additional considerations. We had our permit delegated authority passed in 2016. There have been those changes to the Heritage Act. So staff recommend that we do some review of our procedures for delegated authority, and we'll consider what's minor, what's major, establish a clear list of documents that can be required to support permits, we'll align our heritage grants and permit applications, and may look at other matters that the committee brings up. So that we'd also like to do early on in the year. So next slide, please. That concludes my staff presentation. For this, we are looking for Heritage Committee comments. They will go into a report going to Committee of the Whole, Planning and Administration.
Okay, that was quite a report. So questions and comments, or well, let's do questions for Patrick first. Are there any questions on for Patrick based on his report?
Sorry.
Go ahead, Dan Brown.
I think the program is amazing, the grant program. I don't know if it's just unique to Brantford or how close to Brantford it is. I know that Brant County doesn't offer a grant program and they're looking into it right now. Is there any room in that 40,000 that's left over from the original for an educational piece to it? Because a lot of people don't know about the grant program.
So through the chair, we do have approval to fund like a notice campaign. So mail outs to owners of designated properties. We can draw on a certain amount of the budget per year. So we will be doing that in the new year, just as a standard practice. Whether or not the program would be increased in sort of what it can fund, what the maximums are, we would be telling property owners and reminding them.
I know a lot of people that own heritage properties and they don't know anything about it. So.
Yeah, we look into at least once a year, send those mail-outs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of the mail-outs related to the register program, but again, these changes will give us another opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's necessary.
Okay. Brad, go ahead.
Would there be an opportunity perhaps to invite the owners of heritage properties to come to attend an information session just to outline the grant program to them? I always find that when you have a group of owners in the same room, it's helpful for them in that they can exchange ideas and contractors or who are able to do work, because that's always one of the biggest issues amongst heritage buildings is finding a contractor who's capable of doing the work. So it could extend beyond just the awareness of the grant program.
I think we don't have explicit approval to fund something like that from the program's budget the council approved, but I think our department budget does account for neighborhood meetings that we could draw on that. Maybe after a mail out, we could include information on there. Something we could consider.
Council to proceed with these ideas. We want to have some consultation on it, so we can pull that into that process.
The tax component, that program, that refund, that would have stakeholder consultation with it to implement it. So that would be that next stage. If we get the council direction, we could do that program, but certainly just for the property owners who like own homes or commercial buildings, we could also do a different meeting for them, invite them, or even just do a video online that we could always host on the website. Just because not everyone's always able to attend, but explaining the program.
I saw some hands up on the screen as well. Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to staff, Patrick. Have you guys talked about what you will be looking for as a budget? Because I'm going to play devil's advocate here. If we go through with this, you could essentially have 2 heritage properties come in on the major and 2 minors come in, and then there's no funds left for the rest of the year. Is there a reason why we're not going before council now with budgets rolling around in January?
Through this year, I would have to defer the budget component itself to Alex because I haven't been directly involved in the department budget. The thinking was to improve access for the short term. We're already reporting back in 2025. And so we also may not run out of that budget. Within 1 year, we could also report back to the 2025 budget and ask for those funds. So we're not ruling out any budget requests, just for this specific improvement. It was part of the intended sale of the increases to council that we wouldn't be increasing the draw just yet, that we continue monitoring the program.
Well, in all honesty, my concern is the fact that now that we're essentially going to be offering 3 times the rebate, you're going to get bigger projects coming and knocking that haven't been knocking. So you could end up blowing your budget in a very short order.
Yes, through the chair, we are aware of that potential outcome based on the performance to date. I don't know that we're worried about the first year, but yes, it is a risk. To your first part, if we had to ask for a budget increase, it would more than likely be based on what we see come in. But council originally gave the program $25,000 a year over 3 years. So we could use that as a starting point.
Okay, then.
Yeah. So that's actually what I was going to bring up. When we started this program, it was a 3-year pilot. So in total, it was $75,000. And we've only gone through not even half of that yet. But I do hear what you're saying about, you know, if we were to get two big grants, then that kind of does draw on the fund very, very quickly. Any other questions for Patrick?
I was just gonna add, it would be a nice problem to have if we see that we're going through that budget.
Yes.
We need to go back for more, but
Yes.
our thought was, you know, for this first year, stick with what we have, and then we'll go back with additional budget requests, but we'll have a better sense of, yes, is the 25,000 a year good enough based on what we see might be coming in. So
Okay.
it is more other than now, so fewer applications will take that up, but also because it's more of an amount, hopefully we will get more applications.
Yeah. So I just had a couple of quick questions, I think, just to make sure that I'm understanding it right. So for the one where we only require 1 quote, the lower amount, the Heritage Committee, we don't receive anything about it. It just happens.
The processing of the actual application, yes, it would stay with staff, but we do have a report out that we do at the end of the year.
Okay.
The committee doesn't see that report out because you see the applications come,
Yeah.
right? But that would be something then that you're included on. You'd see that record of all the applications with the budget draw was on a given year. But what we find with the approval process was, again, we have our consultation, and honestly, sort of 50-50 split where property owners would have 1 quote already and say, so this is good enough. And I could look at it and say, like, you have the detail that we need so we can see what the work is. That's perfect. But you do need that 2nd quote. And that's usually where either the delay in submitting happens or we haven't heard from them since the consultation. So the idea was with that 1 quote, if they have it, they could then apply in short order and we could help them with their project. But
So normally we'd receive that through the report, but now we're not going to be receiving that. But from what I heard from you, we were gonna get like a annual report,
Like a memo that
Yeah.
would cover.
and then we'll
pick up
say,
applications.
these are the number of delegated ones that we approved in
Yeah.
the amount.
Minor, major,
Okay,
And
so
that
we're
would-
still gonna see them.
yeah.
The intent is to align the minor permits with the minor grant.
Yeah.
Because right now, there's minor stuff that staff has authority to kick the minor heritage permit to. It's the major permits that we bring to this committee, so.
So when,
Currently, we bring all of the grants to the committee, so you'll see, we tried to bring them to the same meeting, so you're bringing the major heritage permit as well as the grant. But there have been people that we brought where, it's been a minor alteration that, the report about the grant will say, this has already been approved by staff.
so and then,
Just basically approving the grant, so
Yeah.
for those type of minor matters, it'll be a quicker process for us to, issue a minor heritage permit, and we'll just be able to issue the grant along with that.
Yeah.
in a quicker way.
I agree, I understand what you're trying to do there to help speed things up and get more people to draw on it. So then when, for the larger projects that do come before us, then does that mean that included in the reports, we're gonna have something like, this is how much is left in the fund or something like that? Because then what if the fund has dwindled and then we don't know, we approve a grant and then there's not enough money in the fund to pay for it?
Sure, I believe all the reports have had that in the financial implications, like the running tally of this application is eligible for this funding. This is the amount of money that remains in the account, and that's always been part of the factoring in for those reports.
Yeah, I like the fact that we have these two proposals of these two different systems, because there was that one that was for over $100,000 work, and it seemed like giving them $5,000 was really, pennies on their investment. And so having a more responsive program is a really good thing. My final question, I guess, would be about the adaptive reuse part of it. So in talking about that, this grant would, or this idea, this would not, there would be nothing that would come to the Heritage Committee. It would be done outside of the Heritage Committee through that redevelopment process, the Greyfields process, or through another committee.
So the jury, you would see, because it would tie to a designation, you would see a heritage permit. And if the property was listed but not designated, and then came in to the city for a planning application, so you'd see the heritage impact assessment. They would need to have the property, the intent would be that the property gets designated to formally identify some of the heritage attributes that would be retained. So the committee would see that process, the designation process. And as part of going through the Planning Act and the heritage studies being provided to committee for comment, you would see that process go. There's still some work to do on actually creating the program, so that could be something that comes back for discussion. Do those grants come to the committee, or is it already handled because you've seen the designation work going into that property beforehand? The tax grants ultimately all go to council for approval because it is a financial implication to the budget. But that can be something that we discuss further if we get the council direction to proceed down that route.
Yeah, I was just trying to make sure that the Heritage Committee was still involved somewhat in that process. If they are, doing an adaptive reuse of a heritage building or heritage structure, and then the Heritage Committee is in the dark about that, it doesn't seem good. But what you were saying alleviates those concerns. So, thank you.
Want to be encouraging people to adaptively reuse and maintain it. Because there are heritage elements and whatnot, but they're considering a redevelopment of the property. So how do we, provide some additional incentive for them to do that? So similar to how those take programs that we have in downtown Greyfields, and really it was council's idea that we add some additional layers of, if you're going to provide some affordable units, that incentive is going to be greater. So address some heritage issues that could potentially get a greater incentive in that case, but as Patrick was saying, you know, still kind of need to define what that actually means, like is the grant going to be, because, you know, you're changing a building, is there a certain level of, you know, facadism, for lack of a better word, that, you know, we would accept, you know, and still allow for, you know, those types of questions and ideas.
Okay. Any other?
Certainly would come back to you guys after get direction to explore this avenue further.
Yeah, perfect, thank you. Any other questions before we move to our motion and potential comments to include? Seeing none, we'll move forward to the motion. So does anyone have comments that they would like us to add as part of the motion? Mayor Davis.
Yes, I've been sitting here very quietly. The last meeting that I attended, I think I spoke rather in favor of approach to heritage designation. Focuses on encouraging and supporting those who decide to designate their homes or business properties, as opposed to mandating. And this is an example of the type of policy and program that you need in place to encourage and support those who take on a heritage designation for the property, which not only doing it for themselves, they're really doing it for the community and preserving the history of our community. I think we should certainly be rewarding that in some way and encouraging it, supporting it. So I think that in view of what has happened with construction costs in the last 5 years, which have more than doubled, this was originally done in 2018, that the amount for major application, the ceiling changed from 15 to 20,000. To see what the reaction will be, the uptake will be over the next year. And if we get into a situation where we get a budget shortfall over the next 12 months, and the staff can always come back to council and ask us to use one of our contingency funds to make up the shortfall. And I probably support that because, you know, if you're going to take a policy approach to heritage designations, supporting heritage, you got to support it. I think you have to do it in a significant way. So I would certainly support increasing not the cap for minor ones, the cap for major applications, 15 to 20.
Okay.
Seeking a seconder to put that in as a comment.
Well, we're just going to do all the comments, then we do them all together. So that's one comment, to consider increasing the threshold for the major from 15,000 to 20,000.
Budgeted cap.
Yeah.
And I just want to kind of reinforce what Bev was saying about communication, because we're talking about that. I mean, it hasn't been used. Well, why hasn't it? Why haven't people come to it? And I think it's because they don't know. So I think, you know, that has to be reinforced, and the information needs to get to the right people and get to them, because I know owning something on D list, I don't see any communication. So I would like to see that, make sure, I think it goes just to the owners of the property, and that's probably half the problem, because the owner's it doesn't go to the owner's address. It goes to someone in the building who's maybe renting, and they would never forward it. So I think an effort has to be made to get to these people. And I mean, I'm thrilled because we always talk about demolition by neglect. Well, hopefully this will maybe prevent a lot of that.
Yeah. Okay. Did you try and capture that? Yeah, okay, perfect. Any other comments for people? Bev, sorry.
Just been sitting at this table for many years, many of us have. And this is probably one of the most positive programs that have been brought to us, so thank you, and hope it, I hope it gets well used.
I would like to add a comment about the streaming part of it. Adding 2 streams is beneficial to uptake in the program. And any other comments before I seek a mover and a seconder for our comments?
Kind of echoing what you said, but in regards to just informing people about it more, our city does great videos for all the different things that go on in the city. And if we had something like that actually on the city website or on the YouTube page and stuff like that, I feel like even people who may not own that property now, if they're thinking of buying a property here, they might see that and think, oh, hey, there are actually incentives for this and good things that I can do by looking into that and not bulldozing out. So.
Okay. I think we have a great amount of comments. Are you able to put them up on the screen for us, Lisa?
That's what I have to say. I
Okay.
have a comment. I totally agree about the major cost ceiling being raised to $20,000. I do think that all construction costs and materials have gone up, even for small projects. I do think that the small ceiling should be raised as well, from 75 to whatever the number would be. If we're gonna go from the 15 to 20, I think we should go on from 75 to 10. I think it's more of an incentive. The number of houses that you see deteriorating on the outside, we need all the help we can get.
Yeah. I will say that the grant program maxed out at 5,000, right? So this already is an increase.
Oh, no, yes. But if it's 2018, that's.
Can you add in Dan's comment there? Maybe under the first one, because the first one
The ceiling makers.
for major applications. Yeah, and 10,000 or minor.
I don't want to take away from the going up to 20 on the major by any means. I just think that overall costs have gone up.
Yeah.
Since then.
So those are our 3 comments there that you see on the screen. Oh,
I'm gonna ask that we have a separate vote on these items, and if 10K can be separated from the 20, and
into a
I thought
different
about doing that,
yeah.
but I'll tell you why I didn't. And because the minor applications, the process allows them to be processed with 1 quote. So I was concerned about there being an appropriate safeguard. And if the minor application cap of 7,500, that in essence is a $15,000 total project cost. Just my innate sense of fairness and protecting the taxpayers, that I thought that would be the appropriate threshold between meeting 1 quote and 2 quotes. So that's why I didn't do both.
Yeah. Okay. Well understood.
So I'd ask it to be separate.
Yeah. So we're gonna vote on each of these 4 clauses then separately as requested. So we need a mover and a seconder. Moved by Dan, seconded by Sandra. Okay. So we'll go clause by clause. So clause 1, that the Heritage Committee recommends that the ceiling be increased to 20,000 for major applications. So all those in favor of clause 1. Thank you. I declare that carried. Clause 2, then is about the minor grant and increasing the cap for that to $10,000. So on that subsection of the motion, clause 2, all those in favor? 6. Okay, all those opposed? I declare that carried then. Clause C or 3. So that we recommend exploring promotional opportunities such as information sessions to be held in social media promotion or social media promotion. So on that clause, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That's carried. Thank you very much. And the final clause, which is about supporting the 2 streams of the program. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, opposed? Okay, I declare that carried then. We have to vote on all of them together because we class by class. Okay.
We need to vote on the
Oh, okay. So can I have, sorry, we didn't receive it. That was just for comments. So can I have a motion to receive that report? Mandy, seconded by Linda. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you very much. Carried. Okay. On to Mayor Davis's other exciting news, potentially with our next one about our consideration for heritage conservation districts. So Patrick, you've done a great little report here. You want to walk us through it, please?
Sure. Just going to be a shorter overview of the districts, just a highlight of criteria they meet, but then we're focusing on our recommended approach. So next slide, please. Apologies, just for background context, this was part of the same report that directed the review of the Heritage Grant Program earlier this year. This was recommendations. Next slide, please. So there are ultimately 6 districts. They were identified in the prior report and they're included as an appendix to the staff report on the agenda. But just to recap the districts, there's the commercial downtown. So each map has a red dashed outline. In the case of downtown, we already have Victoria Park Square as a heritage conservation district. The district study did contemplate that district eventually being extended to Dalhousie Street. So the commercial downtown HCD would look at basically all properties between Darling and Dalhousie over from George Street to King as an either could be an expansion, it could be its own district. Given the number of properties that are already designated, Sanderson Center, City Hall, Temple Building along a particular stretch, this district could also instead just be a series of individual property designations. So ultimately, we see it potentially meets 5 of the criteria. The way it's set up, 25% of properties have to meet 2 criteria. I don't know that it's all properties in that 25% have to meet those same 2, but they have to meet 2 criteria. So we do think that's feasible for this stretch of downtown. So that would be the extent of the study area. If consultation is approved by council, we would be consulting with property owners and also with the downtown BIA and chamber for this particular district. Next slide, please. The next potential district that was identified by our consultant ASI was the Dominion Steel neighborhood. Some of the properties in what I would call the core are recommended for listing. We didn't get to that phase. But generally they front onto the park and have a distinct style, almost like an English cottage or Tudor look. But that's the entire neighborhood laid out. Like the street pattern reflects what Dominion Steel intended. So we would consider the entire neighborhood for the study area, but that doesn't mean that entire neighborhood would necessarily proceed, but just to consider the full context. This potential district also looks like it would meet about 5 of the criteria for heritage value in the Heritage Act. Next slide, please. Third neighborhood that was identified was within Ward 5 and was a Victory Housing neighborhood. This was a during and post World War II sort of program put in place by the federal government to provide housing to either workers at wartime industries or returning veterans to have a home of their own. This is sort of near Burkitt, near 66 Mohawk. It's in Ward 5. There are other Victory Housing neighborhoods across the city, but this was the one the consultants found in their canvassing. While it didn't have any properties on the inventory, and for that reason you don't see any properties within the neighborhood shown as recommending listing, collectively it is an example of a consistent neighborhood laid out per that program. And it looks like it meets potentially about 4 criteria for cultural heritage value. Next slide, please. And this is another neighborhood where properties did not have entries on the heritage inventory. This is later than the cutoff date for the inventory. This is a neighborhood that is a lot of 50s era. You don't see a lot of heritage designation from the 1950s suburban development throughout Ontario. But again, a consistent presence of what the consultant termed 50s contempo style, with more residential style of architecture dominates in this area. So for that reason, it was another neighborhood that was flagged. Meets approximately 4 criteria, or appears to, subject to further study. Next slide, please. On Waterloo Street, there's the small segment that is Waterloo Court. So the properties highlighted for listing have all been listed on the register, and the properties come with a small section of parkette. So the listing technically covers the houses and their section of the parkette in front. In this neighborhood, the houses were built in similar but mirroring architectural styles. So every pair moving from the center outward is a mirror image of its counterpart. They were all built by the Schultz Brothers Construction Company, which was located nearby at the time, and then they're built by the company and sold off. This is one of the smaller neighborhoods and meets 5 potential criteria. Next slide, please. The last neighborhood that was mentioned in the report would be Lauren Duffer. This would also go up to Palmerston based on the properties that were flagged for listing. A caveat with this neighborhood, there have been 2 prior Heritage Conservation District studies for this area. It still retains heritage value. As we can see on the map, a lot of the properties were recommended for listing either Group A or Group B, and they're from those prior considerations of a district, a number of property owners elected to go forward with individual designations. So that's the 6 properties or 6 neighborhoods that were flagged in the report. All of these neighborhoods appear to meet the threshold of 25% of properties meeting 2 or more criteria. They may vary from property to property, but these were the clear examples that the consultant saw. Next slide, please. What staff are recommending and are taking to council for consideration is that consultation campaign starts. So we're not looking for direction to start Heritage Conservation District studies for each of these neighborhoods. We're asking council to endorse a neighborhood consultation campaign with each neighborhood. So we'd set up a project website overall like we had for the Heritage Register project, details about what a conservation district is, what heritage permits are and how they work, other things that we offer for them like the grant program. Within each of those study areas, we would contact the owners directly with the mail out and other stakeholders where appropriate, again, like the downtown BIA. We'd host a neighborhood meeting for each potential district. We haven't, said it would be 100% online or only in person. We think a hybrid approach would work. Again, sort of the comments provided earlier, maybe even have sort of an introductory video that just stays on the city website for those who can't attend neighborhood meetings, or have neighborhood specific ones and then a more general meeting. We would like to have these neighborhood meetings to reach out to those residents, give them a chance to come out and ask questions of staff and what district is, ask about their neighborhoods, And then we would collect all the comments we received, subject to the mail out, subject to those public meetings, the neighborhood meetings happening, and then report back to council by the end of next year. And that would be in time for a budget request as part of the updates to the 4-year budget. But that would lay out what we heard from each neighborhood, from each study area, which ones are potentially interested in proceeding with the district, or where there isn't an interest from the community at large, and then it would be council's determination. And we identify what the cost would be for a proper district study, and then the plan to be created and to proceed through a designation program. But ultimately, we want to consult the neighborhoods and then report back to council before proceeding any further on that. So what the committee has a chance to comment on is just that plan by staff, the plan for a consultation campaign, other aspects you may want to see. And then next slide, please. And so our recommendation is, again, the report be received and that any Heritage Committee comments be provided to staff to be included in our report to Committee of the Whole.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Any questions for Patrick? Go ahead.
So within each of these potential districts, there's going to be a combination of properties that are already designated, properties that are listed, and properties that are neither of those.
So through the chair, that varies. The maps show in purple properties that were already designated, whether in a district or individually. And then the darker, the orange color is Group A, and the yellow is Group B. Not all, like we saw with the Victory Housing neighborhood and Riverview, there were no properties individually flagged for the register. But that's also because of the cutoff date for the register outside certain areas. So Riverview was never captured, or so the register inventory. Riverview Drive was never captured because it stopped, I think, in the 30s. Properties after that date were added. So it's not the case that every neighborhood has properties of individual note. What our consultant noticed was a neighborhood character when they were doing their first passes in the area, and on subsequent visits, they would see that the character was consistent, and that's why they flagged it as a potential district.
Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. In some of those, okay,
Yeah,
so Duffer and Lord Crescent area, there's going to be a mixture of designated properties currently, listed properties currently, and none of the above.
Yes. Yes.
Would be the third, so, okay.
Any other questions for Patrick? Beth?
Is there any opportunity to review these outlines of the potential district area? And I'll tell you where I have an issue. It's the downtown, because it doesn't take into consideration all those remaining properties that front onto Colburn that are included in the priority Group A and B. And given that we've lost so much, I'm thinking that we need to be a little more robust in our outline of what the downtown could include.
To the chair, that's one thing we did discuss with ASI. There are properties in Group B in downtown on Colburn Street that were listed, and Group A. Looking at the map again, I do see it looks like Harmony Square is actually captured by one of the blocks. I think that might be a misregistered shape.
Okay.
I think it might actually belong
Oh, I see, yeah.
up on George Street, partially. The one priority Group A building was on the east side of Queen at Colburn. And there is Lawyers Hall, which is designated, but talking to the staff at ASI, integrity of some of those properties, and just because they're farther apart, it becomes harder to use the district tool there.
Calculation of.
Yeah, where we have the higher integrity on Delucy, we wanted to focus on those properties to protect them. Like I said, we can still look at individual designations in some case. We have, that's part of the rest of council's direction, and something we're going to report back on separately, was where we could look at individual designations. But we looked at the greatest cluster along Yeah, was on Deluzia of those properties with priority group A and priority group B.
And when you're doing these consultations as well, right? Like that's something that that may come up. Oh, why haven't you included? So I think the boundaries will be something that come up in the consultation piece as well.
Yes, with something, if we hear significant comments about, well, why my neighborhood, not me, or look at this section of street, we can bring that up and when we report back to council.
Because it's not until you have the money and you've actually said, hey, we're doing the Heritage Conservation District study, that's when you actually finalize that outlined area,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, so this is gauging the interest and helps us prioritize it. So we're not using an external budget. This is coming from our existing department budget for posting meetings.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the boundary of the Heritage Conservation District might differ from what the district study was. But at the same time, when we're sending out communication to properties saying we're looking at a potential district in this area, maybe we do cast that net a bit broader. What we're anticipating the district study would be so that those residents might have an opportunity to say, oh, I think I should include it in
Yeah, that's very easy to do with GIS. Once you have the shape file, you have an outline, you can say within 200 meters or whatever, as properties within 200 meters.
You kind of want to have a logical boundary.
Yeah.
Too many outliers, and then now with the additional criteria about percentage of properties that meet them, you know, the greater number of criteria, you can't water it down too much.
Anything else from you, Beth, before I go to Mayor Davis? No? Okay, Mayor Davis.
Through you, Chair, staff, have you thought about whether you may be biting off more than you can chew in 1 year? This is a lot of consultation, a lot of different parts of the city. You thought about doing a staged approach and maybe selecting 2 or 3 that meet the most of the criteria. And also you think an area that might elicit a positive reaction rather than a negative reaction that will impact on the program, on all the programs.
Through the chair, I guess I asked if there are specific areas you think might elicit a stronger reaction, negative. When we look at the criteria, because it was a minimum of 2, and we didn't even have criteria before, it was up to like the study to really determine what the value was of a particular area. If there were no explicit criteria for districts until recently, they all met enough criteria. If one looked not to, we would have left it off. But that's why we wanted to ask the neighbors what they want before we report it back.
Want to walk in the lines, or sure, but a different kind of question. It was interesting. Carlington, Ontario, they were looking at a wartime housing area for designation as a heritage designation district. They backed off this last year. They did a cultural heritage character area. What is that?
So through the chair, the 2 things in the Heritage Act are individual properties or districts. Character area, I think they may be using a term similar to landscape, which can be identified in our official plan. You can use official plans and zoning bylaws or other studies and guidelines. I think based on them not calling it a landscape though, I'm wondering if this is going to be a guideline document, but maybe not as like strictly adopted as going into the official plan as a policy. That is another tool I've seen used, like landscapes as an alternative to districts.
I suspect they did that because in my ad hoc observation of wartime housing districts, you see a lot of renovations. And they have to, because they originally were, prefab temporary construction. Many times they have to do that to maintain the structural integrity of the property, of the building. And while doing so, they like to expand because they're only 1,000 square feet at best. And I suspect owners of those types of homes may view this as quite an intrusion on their rights of property owners. And I suspect that's why Clarington, they backed off and went with this cultural heritage character area. So can you, I guess let me get a request to staff, can you find out at least what Clarington was doing and why they went with this cultural heritage character area? I think you're probably right, it was probably for
I think the question about, do we proceed with the 6 areas that we're showing you tonight? I look at the list on my phone. We haven't prioritized them. If we were to, maybe there's a few that we would knock off. Are the ones that don't have anything that we have reported for listening, but recommended because of their totality, there has some this sort of led itself more to a heritage landscape. So.
Okay, if I just might add to that. So if I look at the areas that, and I can remember being on council in the 80s when we did Brant Ave, and that was a challenge, but there was a community of interest on Brant Ave because they all shared kind of a similar cultural expectation of the street. And if I look at these neighborhoods that you've selected, I think there are a couple of good candidates for that. Certainly the Dominion-Skill neighborhood is very unique, very distinctive. Knowing some of the people who live down there, they highly value the distinctive look of their neighborhood, and they may be more open to it. Likewise, that Waterloo Court, very distinctive. When you buy into that, you know you're buying into a certain heritage cultural feature. And that's a little bit smaller, probably a little more unified in terms of why they moved there and why they value going for those kinds of homes. It would likely be more open and amenable to a heritage district.
If we did exclude, I do suspect we maybe start with later neighborhoods like Riverview Drive because of that lack of prior records that we have for it. Larger lots. We were just going based off what our consultant has seen, rather than trying to cast too wide and maybe a net or insult the whole city, which neighborhoods want.
Well, I think you need to consider as well, if you do an area that turns out badly, right, that may discourage the whole initiative, right, and act as an impediment to doing it. So when you're concerned about that, it seems to me that it's smart to select the first year, one or two that meet a lot of the criteria and that you think will likely be quite accepting of the proposal. It's just my and common sense intuition.
Further that then, maybe on which of those 6 we should focus on.
Yeah. And my last concern, whether you have the staffing ability to do all this.
For the register itself, when we were doing about 100 properties a given phase, we were aiming for 4 phases a year. We had some that were pretty close back to back. Because this was we would not be recommending 6 districts. Studies go ahead in 1 year, that would certainly, even with a consultant, it would be certainly beyond our resources. We simply guess was just talking to the neighbors, seeing which ones were interested. That I think could be handled by staff.
I don't think we're anticipating all 6 for.
No, we did not really think that we have resounding success in every neighborhood. But.
And any other questions for Patrick then? Dan? Okay.
I think hopefully before we set up any meetings to gauge any interest from the neighbors, that we promote the grant program changes that you just put forward to help promote the other interest. So I think they work both hand in hand with.
Yes, through the chair they would. So we do the grant updates. If approved at council, it would be enforced in effect before the end of the year by new bylaw adoption. So in the new year, early on in January, we'd be giving up those notices to property owners and working with our communication staff to just have corresponding sort of social media posts, whether through Facebook or other avenues that we use just to make that more widely known, and updating our page and working with them to get that awareness out. And then again, reflecting all that when we do the consultation, that like, here's the grant program, here's how the city helps owners of heritage properties. So.
Sandra, go ahead.
I am the BIA rep on this committee, so I, and I went, okay, representing, you know, the people downtown. So what would, I'm just curious, given all that's happening downtown, and that will be happening in the next few years, I'm just concerned. That's all that, you know, on top of all that's going on, that we're going to be addressing this. So, you know, I will be reporting that this is part of what could be happening in the future, but if there's a timeline, that would be helpful.
So the chair, so the only timeline right now was that consultation and reporting back by the end of Q4, just to ask what gauge the interest from the different areas.
Yeah.
Beyond that, it is truly subject to council approval of the budget at the end of 2024 through the planning department's sort of budget requests and updates to the 4-year budget. This is just consultation.
Answer your question?
I think so.
Yeah. I kind of share what Mayor Davis is saying here about maybe possibly biting it off too much, but I also think that there is a way that you can possibly do it. So you're not doing 6 consultations, because that would be more than we did per year for the Heritage Register project. Looking at them like the downtown would almost warrant its own one, as well as the Dufferin area, because those properties are so, it's so big and it's so expansive. And then you could probably as well add a couple into one session. So Waterloo Cart, because it's so small, and maybe that Riverview neighborhood could be joined together in one session. So you're doing, you know, a smaller number of properties than just one of the big massive downtown or the Dufferin Ave area, right? But then you are hitting a couple within one meeting. In terms of like priorities for me, in some ways the downtown isn't as big a priority because one, we've lost almost all of it, and the ones that are still existing, those ones seem to have some heritage protection, right? A lot of them are designated or listed. The Dominion Steel one would go again on the higher side for me. The Victory Housing, I'm a little conflicted on that. I think Victory Housing is important, right? This is what we did after World War II. We said people needed a place to live, and we embarked on this mass scale of building public, cheap, affordable housing. And what do we need now? Public, cheap, affordable housing. And it's nowhere out there. And these are the properties that provide that entryway into owning your first house, right? And we should have, frankly, more developments like this happening throughout the city to address that. And like Patrick also pointed out, there's other areas like north of Colburn Street, out by Park Road, there's another little section of Victory Housing chunked in there. So Victory Housing is very important, and it is the affordable housing option as well. The Riverview Drive did confuse me completely. But now I understand what you're saying, that it wasn't in the Heritage Register. But to me as well, that's an area where I don't think there's as much concern about changes happening within that neighborhood. So that one's lower on the list for me. Waterloo Court would be like this is the easiest out of all of them, I would say, to do, right? There's a limited number of properties, limited scope of research, and a bunch of them are already on the register as well. So that would go forward. And the Dufferin area, yeah, that's gone forward twice before and kind of gone nowhere. And then as well, there was a study along William Street as well that was supposed to be part of the Brantford Conservation District, and the William chunk got taken out because there was no buy-in from property owners, I believe, at the time when that Heritage Conservation District was made. So to me, Dufferin Ave, it always seems like I don't know, we're kind of barking up a tree that we know that we're not gonna get in some ways. But you know, none of them objected to being listed on the register really. So that's another thing to consider.
Just to the chair for context, and that's why we made sure we identify in the report very clearly that Warren and Dufferin has been looked at before. We're not trying to avoid that fact. It was identified by the consultants. We're putting it there as a reminder, but we also understand that, yeah, there just may not be buy-in and it may have that view. So if that's a neighborhood that, for example, the ward councilors, you know, feel we've tried that, there is an opportunity for them to say, yeah, we've tried that one twice. We're not going to carry it forward in this consultation program. And so, 2004. It was 96. So it was some time ago. Yeah, there might be something.
All new people.
And even though we've been going with, you know, information about implications, plus the back you've got grant programs that can be considered.
The other thing that I would add is, I think I talked during the Heritage Register project with the consultants about Terrace Hill and how Terrace Hill is expansive. It has everything. It has super early like 1860 structures. It's got like late Victorian. It's got Edwardian. It's got 1950s. It's got everything. And that is one area that the consultants added properties onto the Heritage Register, but they did not look at recommending a Heritage Conservation District. And recently we did not have IT support at work, so I had nothing else to do. So I started doing research on a bunch of the properties on Terrace Hill. And so I think I did the entire south or west side of the street, and I got halfway done the other side of the street. So that would be another area that the consultants didn't recommend, but also maybe potential for a Heritage Conservation District as well. So we have a motion to receive this as well as to add report comments.
Yeah, I think we also have to be mindful that there's a large part of our city and residents that are adamantly opposed to heritage designations and see it as an unjustified intrusion on the rights of property owners. And so that's the other concern about biting off more than we can chew, that subject to misinformation that the Heritage Committee is trying to designate the entire city of Brantford. Right? I mean, that's how people distort these kinds of initiatives, and that's why what it's worth. First go around, more targeted, maybe more beneficial for the long-term prospect of these kinds of programs.
Well, to the chair, if I may offer that if the committee's comments want to say a recommended shortlist, we're happy to work with that and consider those. Like we heard the discussion about Waterloo Court and Dominion Steel neighborhoods. If there's a short list that the committee wants to endorse, then we're happy to focus on that one potentially in the first year and come back to council with that before going on to other areas.
Okay. Yeah.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
So if you have an information session for Waterloo Court every homeowner says, no, I don't want it. What happens then? Is it totally scrapped? There's nothing we can do?
Do we bring that information to council through the chair and say, you know, this is the feedback that was received from this neighborhood? It did appear to meet some criteria, we would need a budget to confirm that, and then so the report would likely be received. But if we saw clear direction from a neighborhood where they wanted it, we could then maybe recommend that one forward.
Yeah, if I might just say, I mean, the political reality is that like, no council is going to designate an area over the unified concern of the residents. That's just what this is. And also, if you're designating against the objections of every single person in that neighborhood, you know, if they don't buy into it, they're not going to live up to the spirit of the Heritage Designation District. So, you know, getting the buy-in is critical to the long-term success, I think, of designations, right? And that's why I like the reward and the carrot approach, so that, and also convincing people there is value to your neighborhood in being designated historically in terms of preserving property values and character. And, so it's really kind of a sales job, and it rarely works if you impose over the objections.
And then it can go to LPAT or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, you can get tied up into appeals, and why would the politicians do that? I would be like my legislature's road in that neighborhood. So that's the reality of these things. That a little more dicey when you have, let's say, you have 60% want it. Yeah, then you can, at least as an elected official, you can say, well, the majority seem to want it. There's a lot of good reasons for doing it. But if there's throughout a neighborhood, there's a strongly voiced concern that they don't want it, I could go on that.
Things you want to add something?
Mayor Davis, and I mentioned it towards the end, I just thought, what if it turns out the consultation afterward isn't like completely against or completely for, it's just split? Then do you ask them a little more about it or give them more information about it, or just it falls by the wayside entirely? Or
I mean, you would hope that through a program that what we're doing with grants, and so there is a benefit to them, right?
Yeah.
And then also convincing them that, you know, you moved here because this neighborhood has a unique character. You want to preserve this character. This is one of the best ways to do it. I found generally in my experience that usually means that in terms of long-term success, whatever you're doing, that it's more likely to be very successful when there's that buy-in.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have to receive the report and comments, if we want comments included. So does anyone have a comment that they would like included at this point? We've had a lot of good discussion about it, so I think that there should probably be some comments associated with things.
I think I guess I'm kind of torn with the idea of conservation districts, because I think it can be risky sometimes. Excuse me. This gets back to the question I asked earlier about a mixture of 3 different kinds of properties and property owners within a proposed area. And it would need to be explained in a neighborhood meeting very well what would happen if a neighborhood is designated, and if the majority are for it and council approves it, but you've got a pocket of people who are in that group, their property is not designated, they don't want it to be designated, but yet by association now, and we saw an example of it already today with the TD Bank, they're not designated, but because they're in a heritage conservation district, when they want to make a change to the front of that property or to that property, there's special circumstances and procedures that they have to follow just because they're part of that neighborhood. So and it can become very complicated. Designated properties are one thing. Listed properties with the current legislation are going to be falling off the heritage register if the time expires on them now. But that group of people who aren't interested in it all, but if the majority of their neighbors voted to be part of this, they're going to be subject to these special regulations as well. So that's going to have to be very well explained to them. What's designation, what's not designation of an individual property. But if you're part of the neighborhood that's designated, certain things are going to be incumbent on you, whether you voted for it or not. And it could become very risky. I mean, I think of all the meetings we've had just about the sign bylaw on program on Brant Ave, and just because of an area, not because of an individual voted for or against something. But a neighborhood meeting would have to be very strategically set up and well explained so that everyone knows where they would stand, whether they're for or against it, and whether it goes through or not, whether the majority votes, and you're not in the majority, then where do you stand?
So that's part of the consultation piece. For the
Yeah,
meeting,
yeah,
so-
that would need to be very well explained.
Yeah, the differences between everything, okay?
And I want to say, in representing the BIA, and given what you said, when information comes out and a lot of people start getting panicky, and they're already panicky about what's going on downtown, and rightfully so, I would like to, and I think the way that I can get around this, going back to that committee, is to maybe talk to the planning department, just to make sure I have the correct information, so that when I'm going to introduce this because I'd rather do it before someone else does it. And then make sure that they have the right information and the timelines, because they are quite extended, and to do that. So I will like to draw on the planning department for a source of that information.
Okay. So Lisa's done some comments, yeah?
Through the discussion, I have some comments here. If you want to include them, we can. If you don't, we don't have to. So just taking it back to the beginning of the discussion, recommending further investigation into the mapping and consider possible revisions or expansions, specifically in the commercial downtown core area. Suggest that staff consider what areas will have the most overall support and the distinctness of those areas, and highlighting the need to have community collaboration. Recommend that staff investigate the cultural heritage character area concept from the municipality of Clarington. Recommend that staff explore promotional opportunities such as information sessions or social media as listed in the first resolution we passed tonight. The committee highlights the size of consultation that this project will require, and recommends that certain areas be consulted together where possible. And then finally, the committee notes that certain property owners will be potentially subject to the Heritage Conservation District's rules despite being listed or designated properties, and emphasizes the need for staff to be able to articulate what those property owners will be responsible for.
So those are 6 comments that we have. I think those summarize our discussion fairly well, right? So I'm seeking a mover and a seconder to receive the report and for those comments. Please. Dan Brown seconded. Any discussion on the comments? Can we vote on them as one whole chunk? People feel confident doing that? I've seen some nods. Okay, so then I'll call the question on receiving the report and those comments. as I articulated, or as Lisa articulated. All those in favor? Thank you. Although any opposed? I declare that carried then. All right, we are moving on to 4.9. Overview of more amendments to our Interior Heritage Act. The proposed less red tape and more common sense. Well, let's see how much common sense there is.
Through the chair, I don't have a staff presentation for this, just some verbal updates. I gave the link to the environmental registry on Ontario posting for this one. Ultimately, the proposed amendments are very narrowly targeted to a very specific process and situation. But however, that's still difficult to quantify the impact. Just to say up front, most of the places of worship in Brantford, so most of the churches are within heritage conservation districts. I think of one at one at 165 Murray Street is all I can think of offhand that is individually designated. That's British Methodist Episcopal Church. I may be saying that wrong. I apologize if I am. Anyway, so the amendments right now are to section 33. That's heritage permits for individually designated properties only. So none of the properties in districts, actually in district bylaws, would be affected by this change. But the way the process works now, owner of a designated property can apply for a permit to alter the property. The municipality can approve that permit, deny it, or approve it with conditions. And that's a 90-day from the date that application is deemed complete, that a decision has to be made or the application is approved automatically. So what the Ministry of Citizenship and Multiculturalism is proposing is that for individually designated places of worship, that religious group could apply to the city through the permit process and say that this alteration or this building or this part is used primarily for religious purposes. We are going to be changing some heritage attributes for religious purposes. And that's why it's required. That's what it's connected to. And then there'd be an affidavit essentially saying that this information is true. And if those conditions are met, the municipality could either deem the application complete or incomplete, but once it's complete, there'd be a 30-day period to approve it. There's no ability to deny, and you couldn't approve with conditions. So again, it's really targeted specifically to places of worship, but because it's Part 4 properties and the definitions do have to be necessarily broad to respect the rights of religious freedom and acknowledging their different practices, that does technically open up any individually designated property to this process. If you have a church that's not designated, or the rectory was, and they want to change the rectory to accommodate something, this affidavit could say this is used for religious purposes. So it's very, very broad in terms of how it would apply. Again, very short time period. And in a way, I'm wondering, why would they even have to go through the process if within a month, which is very difficult. I mean, if you don't have delegated authority, this in Brantford would never make it to council based on our procedure bylaw, which is approved automatically. There are some proposed conditions, and this couldn't be for an addition to the building, and it has to be for the benefit of a religious organization. There are proposed definitions to try and implement that, but again, they aren't necessarily broad to respect the charter and human rights code. There were some questions for municipalities about how often you see these types of alteration, these permit applications come through just for places of worship, and then for the owners of places of worship that are designated. How often do you have to alter your property? I can't think in recent history of any applications we had for individually designated like churches or other places of worship. And I can't think of any that were required for, like, again, quote unquote religious reasons. We've had, for example, in Brent Avenue, creating a glass enclosure over front entrance, but that was to help the parishioners. So again, I don't know how often we might see this being used. I could envision it being used if a church or other place of worship changed to a different religion or a different denomination. There was an example, I think, up in Markham where an Orthodox parish took over another church, and then they installed mosaics on the exterior that are more in keeping with their style of church iconography. And I could think of an example in Hamilton where a synagogue went to a temple, a Hindu or Sikh temple. I don't know that when I drive past on the way home, I haven't really seen any exterior alterations. Presumably, this would be, like changing stained glass out where there's an image of a saint. Well, if you don't venerate that saint, or that has no place in your particular worship, that could be altered, or removal of a cross on a church steeple. But again, it's hard to say exactly what the implications would be. This is just for information from the committee. The comment period closes on December 3rd for this set of amendments, and I believe for the bill. And then it's expected it would come into force. In fact, it would receive royal assent to be proclaimed by or on January 1st, 2024, on a go-forward basis from the new year. That's just the overview of the amendment package.
Any questions for Patrick about this? I have one then. So about you mentioned Drake Memorial Church as an example of our designated one that this would apply to. So if they came forward with a permit, a heritage permit, we would have no choice other than to approve it.
So through the chair, they have to submit this specific affidavit saying, one, that they use the property for religious purposes, two, the alteration is happening to address religious purposes. Otherwise, like adding a fire escape, let's say on the back of the building, because of just the way our delegation of authority is set up, that might need a heritage permit, but it may not really be religious. Then the normal process presumably applies. If there's going to be an actual concern, I would say I have with this act is this affidavit tool. It's really not even religious, or not religious, it's not heritage specific. Where else could the province decide? We would just like to introduce an affidavit that gives an applicant or owner a avoid the process card. Like if you imagine a rezoning application where the municipality has to approve a rezoning that creates residential units within 30 days or else it's approved. Okay, but are you going from a single detached house to a 20-story tower, right? So it's again, it's very specific to places of worship. It appears they're trying to constrain it to changes that are needed for practice, not just function of building. But it remains to be seen the impact.
Thank you. So we need a motion to receive this report. Moved by Sandra, seconded by Dow. Any further discussion on this report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? Don't see any. I declare that carried. Okay, on to item 4.6, which is the nomination of Constable Hickey for inclusion on the Prominence Point. Sandra, do you want to speak to this at all?
I think we talked about this a few meetings ago, and I think the only issue that the Heritage Committee was a bit concerned about was whether Constable Hickey had his accident when he was working or not. I think there was, from what I gathered, some more research on the Brantford Police Services Board might have undertaken that, but he was working. And I think that was the last part of it. We've seen his history, everything about him. I think we reviewed a few months ago. And so the Prominence Committee would like to bring that forward for your consideration.
So we have that, that the report be received and that Constable Hickey, John Hickey, be included on Prominence Point in 2024, recognizing his civic and community leadership. So would someone like to move that motion? Bev, thank you. A seconder. Dan Brown, thank you very much. Any other discussion on our nomination for Prominence Point? See, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I just need some clarification.
Mhm.
I went and read through the documents from the police chief in the letter that he wrote to Police Chiefs Association, I believe, back in 2020, I guess it was. And the remarks that he was making in that letter to me made it sound like he was wanting Constable Hickey to be included on a memorial to recognize the fact that he was injured in the line of duty that eventually led to his death. Now, is that what the Prominence Point Committee is basing their recommendation on too, or? Because I'm confused because it was saying it was based on civic leadership and, you know, because you were choosing a category that was already outlined in your, in the committee's procedures.
Yeah.
So I'm confused about the significance of the nomination and like what stream it's taking. Like, if it was passed, what would the plaque on the Prominence Point Monument say in the end? Or is it because civic leadership, or because this individual was injured in the line of duty that eventually led to their death?
Yeah, so I think I'm
confused.
I think I can answer some of that. So the police, they did initially reach out to us, and then throughout the pandemic, they successfully got him added to a national memorial for officers who were injured or died in the line of duty, something like that. And then when the committee met, there are a number of categories that they would fit into, including a very broad other category, right? So out of all of the other clearly defined categories, civic and community leadership seemed the most appropriate category. He was right. He was not involved in sports. He wasn't involved in arts and culture. He wasn't involved in politics, right? It was his affiliation with the police that was, and that's really the civic part of things, right? Doing his civic duty as a police officer. Does that help?
To me, it would fall more in the other than the civic leadership. Because I read the criteria for the civic leadership, and I had difficulty based on the information that was supplied. Placing him in that category.
I mean, just to answer to that, yes, there is the other, and we did consider that. But again, what we were looking at is he's civic leadership basically in his position as a police officer. So you're right, it might not fit. I mean, what we're all thinking of as a civic leader, not too sure in Brantford who that might be, like who you're kind of relating that to, like who you're thinking that person should be. But that's what we considered in his duty as in the police force, which is a civic leadership almost position as a force. And then we put it there instead of coming up with another, which would be along the same lines, only a little more diluted civic leadership.
The civic and community leadership says achieve prominent military ranking or decorations in any branch of the armed services, substantial or influential role in public life as a politician or diplomat, prestigious honor like the Order in Canada, or serves as an ambassador to the Brantford community. So I think that's the piece that the police officer was serving as an ambassador to the Brantford community. And then about the plaque, nothing about the plaque has been, the wording of the plaque or anything has been talked about at this point. We're just confirming that Constable Hickey is going to be the appointee.
And I think that does come back to the Heritage Committee too, doesn't it, for the wording on the plaque?
Or to the Prominence Point.
To the Prominence Committee, then to the Heritage Committee.
Okay? Clear for you, hopefully?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I'm just not necessarily totally on board with it, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments or questions about the motion? We had a mover and a seconder, correct? Yes. Oh, Greg, go ahead.
Sorry, just unmuting myself there. Now I quickly, I looked over the biography of Officer Hickey and saw that like he was injured when he was 38, had only served for 7 years, and it took 2 years for him to for his injuries to get, like, he never really went back to work after the injuries, and it took 2 years for the injuries to get to him. I was just wondering, in the report of the accident that led to his injuries, were how many other people were injured? Was it were there other fatalities, long-term sort of thing? And it just seems to me he didn't really dedicate too much of his life, and the injuries, like if they had been, I don't like, it just seems kind of odd that we're honoring somebody who's only served for 7 years, when I'm sure there's officers, if that's what we want to go towards, who served longer term, like 30, 40 years and stuff. And why, I just don't get why it's this gentleman when it's such a short time period. And if there were others on the tram or whatever, on the train, that were hurt when he was, and everything else, was it because he was helping others that the injuries happened as well? Or and maybe Councillor Sullivan wants to answer my questions. I don't know.
Yeah, so I'll try and take a stab at it first. That I know of, no one else was injured.
There was one more.
There was one other injury, Sandra.
But not fatal.
Yeah, Sandra has mentioned, and it wasn't fatal. So the other piece, I think he was injured, and then it did take him some time to succumb to his injuries. You are correct about that. Councillor Sullivan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's also important that we realize the size of the police force at his day and age. It's not like you would see a police force now. Secondly, he's already been recognized by the federal government. So in all honesty, the municipality, as we are following up the rear here. We should have been on top of this first.
Good comments. Thank you. Any other discussion before I call the question?
And I think one thing that was, I think, in the literature, he kept trying to come back. So here, sure, he had 7 years. He was injured. He tried to come back. And that seemed to have been what his wishes were the entire time that he was off. And it just, when you look at what him and his, I think he had 4 children, his family, 4 children, that given the healthcare at the time, I think I even saw in there that they didn't normally go to a hospital. So there's just a whole lot in there that makes this really important. It was the times, it was his family that also should be on this list too. But take it all into consideration, not just one person, one police officer who worked for 7 years and then perished.
Okay, I think we've had some good discussion, and I think I'm ready to call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. All those opposed? Thank you very much. I declare that carried. Okay, we're through the chunk of things. We're getting to the end. Minutes. So we have minutes from our October 23rd meeting that were sent out ahead of our meeting tonight. Any errors or omissions in the minutes that anyone noticed? Seeing none, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the minutes. Dan Bratton, you were there. Mover, okay, seconder. I see Linda. Thank you very much, Linda. Call the question for approval of the minutes. All those in favor? Thank you. Opposed? Seeing none, I declare that carried. There are no resolutions and no notices of motion. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Sandra, thank you very much. Have a great month. See everyone in December.
Good night.
Have a good night.